Welcome, everyone. My name is Manisha Thomas. I am the Geneva representative for the Women's Refugee Commission, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this session on making inclusion a reality in GRF pledges, a dialogue on age, gender, and diversity. Before we start with our welcome remarks, I just want to briefly explain the interpretation and captions. If you go to the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and if you don't see it, there's the three dots that say more on the right-hand side of the menu, and you should be able to get interpretation there, and you can switch between the channels. We have English, French, Spanish, and Arabic, and we also have international sign language. We also have captions, which you can get by looking again on your Zoom menu on the right-hand side towards the right, or where the three dots are, see the live transcript and be able to view what is being said. Having said that, I've turned mine on, and there it is. It is definitely working. So you can have the live captions as well so that you can follow along. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce Jeff Roach, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative and Deputy Head of Mission at the Australian Permanent Mission to the United Nations in Geneva, who is going to be giving us some introductory remarks and a welcome as well. So Jeff, let me hand over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Manisha. Welcome everyone to a very chilly Geneva day. It might be chilly here, but we've got a really fascinating and invigorating conversation looking at the run sheet today. It's going to be a terrific afternoon, and thank you to everybody involved in pulling today together. Australia's delighted to be in partnership with the group of friends on age, gender and diversity. Supporting the preparations for the Global Refugee Forum is so important for all of us. As you know, the group formed following the 2019 Global Refugee Forum with the purpose of supporting the implementation of the Global Compact on Refugees to uphold the rights of all displaced people, inclusive of age, gender, and diversity considerations. I'm going to call it AGD from this point forward, and I'm sure you're going to be doing the same this afternoon. This is going to be a really rich conversation. There are lots of interesting voices and perspectives, so I'm going to be quick with my remarks. To begin with, how are we tracking on having AGD considerations in the GRF? Analysis has shown that 30% of the pledges made at the 2019 GRF specifically supported diverse groups of refugees, but we can do better at the next GRF. With only 35 days to go, though, it's a critical time to reflect as we work together to remove barriers to accessing humanitarian assistance and to realising rights. Today's workshop, we're going to look at practical tools to support an AGD approach to pledge making. The AGD tip sheet for GRF pledges remains as relevant now as when it was developed in 2019 by UNHCR and one of our long-term partners, the University of New South Wales Forced Migration Research Network. We're pleased that with Australia's support, the Forced Migration Research Network has recently conducted an audit of GRF multi-stakeholder pledges in 2023, including recommendations to provide AGD principles in all pledges with a focus on prevention and response to gender-based violence. These recommendations are supported by rigorous academic research, and this work has built a better understanding of GBV as a barrier to meaningful participation. This learning has been applied in practice to support the capacity of women-led refugee organisations in Thailand, Bangladesh and Malaysia to prevent and respond to GBV. Australia will be looking to expand partnerships with women-led refugee organisations as part of our co-leadership of the multi-stakeholder pledge on gender equality and protection from GBV. Australia is deeply committed to this work and this focus, but even with the best of intentions, we don't always get it right. We recognise that in 2019, some of our pledges could have been strengthened by a more rigorous AGD approach. For example, our 2019 pledge on education spoke in broad terms about improving the inclusiveness of education services for refugees and host communities, but it wasn't specific about how we would go about achieving this. This meant the pledge did not explicitly set out or track AGD-specific objectives. And if you don't track or measure, you lose your focus. Fortuitously, when this was aligned, though, with our pledge, also in 2019, to promote the inclusion of people with disabilities, the two pledges achieved mutually reinforcing results. So what are the results of what we got in 2019? What do they look like? In Lebanon, through a partnership with Humanity and Inclusion, Australia piloted a program providing 30 public schools with technical and financial assistance to strengthen disability inclusion. Our support provided 550 refugee children with assistive devices to promote learning, and provided teachers to overcome barriers to education for children with physical disabilities. Through UNICEF, Australia has supported the expansion of this program to 60 public schools, enhancing access for over 1,300 children with disabilities in 2022. Our support reached then a further 550 children with disabilities through non-formal education programs. We're looking forward to hearing more from those in the workshop about how we can do better to incorporate AGD considerations into our pledging later this year. In closing, I'd like to thank all of you online for your ongoing commitment, for promoting greater inclusion in humanitarian policies and practice. In particular, I want to thank and commend UNHCR for its continued leadership and commitment to the AGD approach. At the GRF and beyond, together as the group of friends, let's please make sure we continue our work to ensure protection and support is accessible to and inclusive of all refugees, displaced people, and others affected by crises. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And I think that point you made about how we really need to make sure our pledges are inclusive of age, gender, and diversity so that we can really measure and track progress is really key. So thank you for highlighting that, as well as those very concrete examples. And I think for those of you who were at the first Global Refugee Forum, we developed a tip sheet there on age, gender, and diversity, which we then updated. So it wasn't just UNHCR and University of New South Wales, they contributed, but there were many of us also from the NGO side who contributed to those tip sheets as well. So I think it's been a work in progress since the first, even before the first Global Refugee Forum. And it's really great to see how age, gender, and diversity is one of the recommendations of how pledges should be inclusive. And I think the point really is, how do we make sure that we don't leave anyone behind, which is really key, because you often have populations amongst refugees who may be marginalized, may be less visible, may not be easy to access for those of us who work with refugees, but it's making that extra effort to make sure we identify them and include them in the pledges. So as you said, Jeff, we've got a great lineup today, lots of amazing speakers who are going to give us some good ideas and thought for how we can really look at our pledges and make them more inclusive of age, gender, and diversity in the run-up to the Global Refugee Forum. And we'll be talking a little bit about how we, as the age, gender, and diversity group of friends, can also help to do that. So huge thanks also to Australia and UNHCR for helping put this session together and for providing the interpretation for us. As we've got sign language, international sign, as well as English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. So thank you very much for that support. With that, I would love to invite those of you who are joining us today. We want to make this as interactive as possible, but without overwhelming you with interaction. But we do have a Q&A. So if you have any questions during the session, please just click on the Q&A button in your Zoom menu at the bottom, and you can put your questions in there. And I invite all the panelists and those on the AGD group of friends to provide answers to those. And if some of you who are on the AGD group of friends don't have access just send us a message and we will see how we can make sure that you are able to respond there as well. I'd also invite everyone in the audience to please just introduce yourselves in the chat, your name, where you're joining us from, and who you're working with, just so we have a sense of who's in the room. And then also feel free in the Q&A or in the chat to give us some of your examples of how you're making sure that your GRF pledges that you're working on are inclusive of age, gender, and diversity. And I think one of the real reasons that we wanted to do this event is over the years, sometimes we use AGD as sort of a throwaway acronym, but really there's a huge amount of meaning behind those three letters. And it's really trying to reflect the diversity that that refugees have, as all of us do, and making sure that we're including that all those different elements of diversity into the pledges and how we're responding in refugee contexts. And I think it's also very important to recognize that, we're not individuals that are just, one-dimensional. We are multidimensional. So there's various aspects that can come together and can create even more vulnerabilities for individual refugees or groups of refugees. So it's really looking at what are the different impacts, what are the areas that might cause greater vulnerability or that may cause different or specific needs that need to be able to be reflected in the responses that we're doing. And so how we can make sure that the pledges that we're putting forward in the Global Refugee Forum really do reflect those. With that, we also want to hear from you. So throughout the session, we're going to have a number of Zoom polls to just get a bit of a sense from those of you in the audience what your perspectives are on age, gender, and diversity. So our first Zoom poll, if we could get that up, please, is do you think your GRF pledge or your planned GRF pledge is inclusive of age, gender, and diversity? If you think yes, great, let us know. Somewhat, no. If you're not sure, that's okay. If you don't see the relevance of AGD, let us know. If you don't know how to make your pledges inclusive of AGD, also let us know that there. I'm sorry, I should have done that a little bit sooner so that we could get the answers. I'm going to let you fill that poll in. And in the meantime, I'm just going to walk us through a little bit of the agenda that we have for today, because I know that's not there. Oh, and I see that apparently our chat has been disabled for all except for hosts. So hopefully we will have that sorted out so that everyone can introduce themselves in the chat, please. Thank you to those who are helping us put this on in the background. Could we get the agenda up as well, please? Sorry. I know, Lisa, I'm asking you lots of things. Lisa from Reese McCann is helping us, so wonderful. So today, what we're going to first talk about, we basically have three big sections to our event. The first one is going to be looking at different diverse groups. The second one will be focusing very much around gender equality and protection from GBV. And I think we're very keen on this element because within age, gender, and diversity, gender equality and GBV can produce a lot of particular vulnerabilities for individuals. So really making sure that we take a look at that. And then the third section will be on meaningful participation, so meaningful refugee participation, before we have next steps and closing, which we will be doing at the end. And I know that somebody said they can't use the poll, but I believe that's because that was a host. So anybody who's a host or panelist, you won't be able to reply, but I do see that we've got about half of our participants who've already replied to our poll. So if you've not done that yet, please do. That would be wonderful. Maybe just to go back a little bit towards that tip sheet, and you can see there on the agenda, that is our age, gender, and diversity tip sheet. And I think what's really important is why we have put this together is in order to really help people identify what is age, gender, and diversity. So you'll see from that kind of flower diagram with people at the center that diversity can be many things. It can be obviously age, gender, age or gender, linguistic diversity, social status, sexual orientation, disability, ethnicity, race, nationality, your legal status, whether you're, stateless or not. I mean, there's many elements that can contribute to being or for age, gender, and diversity elements that can come together. And when they do come together, those, as I said before, can produce more increased vulnerabilities for individuals. So we need to see how we can properly respond to those and make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind. We do have the tip sheet, just because that picture is in English, it's because I did the PowerPoint in English, but we do have the tip sheet available in English, French, Spanish, and Arabic, and the links have been posted in the chat so that you're able to access those as well. I'm just going to take a look at the poll results. So I don't know if we can put up the poll results, Lisa, actually. I think we forgot to test that. But just from what I can see is that out of the 26 people that answered, 100% answered that yes, their pledges are inclusive of age, gender, and diversity. 23% said somewhat. So I think there's multiple answers here because obviously people have more than one pledge, I hope. There's 8% that said they're not sure, and one respondent said they don't know how to make it AGD inclusive. So for that one person, I hope that this webinar and this event will be helpful in terms of being able to make your pledge inclusive as we move ahead. So thank you very much for that. We will have a couple of other polls, and so we'll come back to that momentarily. So with that, and I obviously haven't explained all of age, gender, diversity in its fullness because that's why we have an excellent lineup of panelists. So we're basically going to have 3 different panels address those 3 topic areas. And so for the first one, moving to different diverse groups. In the AGD tip sheet, if we could have the next slide, please, Lisa. Yes, the links for the age, gender, diversity document are in the chat because I see someone asked that question. Can we have the next slide, please? Sorry. So in the age, thank you. In the age, gender, diversity tip sheet, we talk about different diverse groups in many ways. And so one of the elements of how to make your make your Global Refugee Forum pledge inclusive of AGD is to sort of answer the question, does the pledge acknowledge and address those different barriers, needs, and capacities of girls, boys, women, and men, including people of all ages and gender identities, those with disabilities, and other diverse groups? So that's really kind of the first big question that we think is a helpful one to ask as you're looking at your pledge. You know, does it really address those different barriers? Does it address the needs of people and their different capacities and of those different various groups? And so to really kind of dig into this and why it's important to look at these different diverse groups, we have 3 speakers today who are going to speak on this one. So the first we have is Ana Pau. Ana is a 16-year-old Venezuelan girl in Peru, activist and advocate for displaced people's rights and equity. And I realized that I had asked for people to be spotlighted a little bit. Actually, can we have the next slide, please? And also then spotlight our speakers, if that would be possible, please, Lisa. So we've got Anna, we've got Dula Jijit, who is on the reference group on inclusion of persons with disabilities in humanitarian action. She's a fellow for Asia with the International Disability Alliance. And we have Osman Lara, who is the president of the Comité, and now I'm going to say it in English because I don't know how to say it in Spanish. I apologize, Osman. LGBTIQ+ del Valle de Sula in Honduras. So welcome, Anna, Dula, and Osman. Great to have you with us, and very pleased that you are going to be speaking to us on this first session, or this part of our session on different diverse groups. First, and again, I do invite people in the audience to please put your questions into the Q&A so that we can answer them as we move along. And we do have the more detailed bios of our speakers in the chat. And before I start asking them some questions, we're going to have a second Zoom poll. And yes, we will share the recording after. We'll put it up somewhere, I'm sure, or we will send an email about it. So for our second Zoom poll, I'm going to close my, thank you very much, Lisa. So for the second Zoom poll, the question is, are your GRF pledges targeting or highlighting refugees of different ages, genders, and diverse groups? And you can either answer this one with yes, no, somewhat, or you don't know. And we will come back to the poll results at the end of this part of the session. And with that, I'm going to turn to our speakers so I can stop speaking for a while. I'm going to ask Anna and then Dula and then Osman. First of all, why is AGD important from your perspective? Anna, please.
Buenos días, buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches con todos. Como ya me había presentado anteriormente, mi nombre es Ana Paula Díaz Rodríguez y bueno, yo vengo desde Quinta Ola. Ahora voy a responder la pregunta. Considero que es importante el enfoque de edad, género y diversidad, ya que desde mi perspectiva como adolescente e inmigrante venezolana viviendo en el Perú hace más de 4 años, estos enfoques son cruciales porque reconocen las diversas y únicas necesidades de los diferentes grupos dentro de la infancia. Es decir, todos tenemos diferentes realidades. Como podría plantear de ejemplo, un niño de 8 años no tiene las mismas necesidades que un adolescente, en mi caso de 16 años. Considero que hay que ser inclusivo con los niños, niñas y adolescentes desde una perspectiva de edad y género para abordar los derechos básicos y nuestras necesidades como infancia desplazada, reconociendo prioritariamente las necesidades que puedan tener unas sobre otras, ¿no? Ya que, como dije anteriormente, un niño de 8 años, de 5 años, no tiene las mismas necesidades o en mayor, digamos, prioridad que un adolescente de 16 años. Además, y por último, los niños, niñas y adolescentes desplazados experimentamos de manera diferente los desafíos al acceder a servicios y recursos esenciales, como la educación, la documentación, la atención médica. Y es una preocupación importante, especialmente debido a la complejidad de obtener documentación legal, que de muchas maneras dificulta más el acceso a nuestros derechos básicos. Eso sería todo. Muchas gracias. Disculpen si hablé muy rápido.
Perfect, Anna. I should have warned everyone that we've given all the speakers very strict timing so that we can hear from all of them because we do have so many. So thank you, Anna, for that. Really appreciate that. Dula, from your perspective, why is AGD important? Yeah, it's
Yes.
coming, I think.
Duya speaking. Thank you so much for the question. My name is Duya Jigjat and I'm from Mongolia. My opinion related to disability inclusion and the reason why it's important to have disability inclusion in your DRG pledges. Disability experiences are very diverse. And it is important to include various groups of disability and understand that it's not a monogamous group. It is equally important to consider age and specifically related to the needs of refugees when you look at the different services that needs to be accessed. So diversity is an equally important component to consider. Disabilities is only one part of the intersections that people can have. You can have all types of intersections, for example, including your disability status, your refugee status, your age, as well as how you identify based on being female, male, or your gender. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Osman, from your perspective, why is AGD important, please?
Buenos días, buenas tardes y buenas noches a todos y todas. Mira, desde mi perspectiva desde mi punto de vista, este es un espacio de diálogo internacional que realmente puede poner a la palestra pública nuestras necesidades como personas de diversidad sexual, ya que en el contexto latinoamericano, que ha sido muy violento o muy machista para personas LGBTI, es importante resaltar que también el contexto va a variar según la zona, porque por ejemplo, la zona centroamericana es muy violenta para personas LGBTI, en especial Guatemala, El Salvador y Honduras. Y en esta zona realmente solo Costa Rica y Guatemala tienen albergues o espacios seguros para personas en movilidad que sean LGBTI. De estos países, solo Costa Rica posee leyes en beneficio de las personas LGBTI y Belice, y aún Belice en el 2020 penalizaba las relaciones entre personas del mismo sexo consensuadas. Entonces vemos todas esas necesidades de poderlas plasmar y que poder ser la voz en ese momento, ya que este es un espacio, como te digo, de diálogo internacional donde van a haber muchísimas figuras de autoridad o de toma de decisiones dentro de nuestros países, y es importante que se puedan dialogar estas necesidades, ya que como mencionó también Ana Pao, las necesidades van a variar, no van a ser las mismas tanto para un hombre gay con expresión de género masculina, considerada masculina, como para un hombre gay considerado con expresión de género femenina. Lo mismo va a ser para una mujer transexual, un hombre transexual, porque las necesidades van a variar. Como te digo, Honduras actualmente tiene uno de los índices más elevados en asesinatos de personas LGBTI y todavía no cuenta con leyes de protección para personas LGBTI. Actualmente se aprobó el año pasado la ley de desplazamiento forzado, que es la única que menciona a las personas LGBTI, pero todavía falta su, eh, su reglamentación, y es necesario que como personas LGBTI estemos en este diálogo para poder dar a conocer la necesidad de participar en esta reglamentación y que pueda ser incluida desde nuestras necesidades como personas sexualmente diversas y como personas que vamos a tener desde nuestro grupo de diversidad otras perspectivas, otras necesidades según la población a la que vamos a estar atendiendo. Asimismo, Honduras cuenta con 9 albergues. ¿Tiempo? No, no, Honduras cuenta
Yes.
con 9 albergues.
Sorry, Osman. You'll have more time to answer the next question. Sorry, I'm just trying to keep us on time. I apologize for that. Building on that, and I think thank you to all of you. I think you've really highlighted the fact that we have to look at the diversity because there is diversity and that will reflect in different needs. I'm going to ask all of you this next question as well. What is an example of a GRF pledge that you want people to either join or make, or what elements would you like to see in a GRF pledge or a possible GRF pledge? Anna, from your perspective, what would you like to see in a pledge, or what's a good example?
Bueno, yo he recopilado en ciertos aspectos como lo que me gustaría ver. Para empezar, he participado en el desarrollo del compromiso de los derechos del niño con Save the Children, y este compromiso incluye cómo abordar las diversas necesidades y derechos de los niños, niñas y adolescentes, reconociendo que estos requisitos pueden diferir según la edad, el género y otros antecedentes diversos. Lo que considero fundamental en este compromiso es el énfasis en fomentar la inclusión y asegurar que las voces de las niñas, niñas y adolescentes no solo se escuchen, sino que se consideren activamente en la formulación de políticas y el desarrollo de programas. Además, sus objetivos principales hablan de nuestros derechos básicos, como la importancia de proteger a los niños, niñas y adolescentes desplazados de la violencia, el abuso y la explotación, permitir su participación significativa en decisiones que afecten sus vidas, brindar acceso a servicios esenciales y sensibles a los niños, niñas y adolescentes, como la educación o la salud. Un elemento crucial que me gustaría ver en todos los compromisos del Foro Mundial de los Refugiados es la mayor inclusión y participación de niñas y niños y adolescentes. Además de que mediante esto podemos hablar del adultocentrismo, que es un problema que limita muchísimo a los niños, niñas y adolescentes para tener participación importante en temas como estos, ¿no? Que son a nivel mundial, y por ello se nos complica un poco nuestra participación. Les explico brevemente qué es el autocentrismo. Es cuando, por ejemplo, en una reunión de 50, 60 adultos solamente vemos 2 o 3 niños, o en su totalidad no hay niños. O cuando, por ejemplo, estamos en una discusión o en una conversación entre un niño y un adulto y el niño o adolescente se ve invalidado por ser niño, con la condición de tú eres niño, quizás no tienes el mismo conocimiento que yo. Entonces eso es algo que debería erradicarse y debería estar en este compromiso, ¿no? La participación activa, tanto en el desarrollo como en la exposición del compromiso. Por último, no se puede dar por hecho que todos los niños, niñas y adolescentes desplazados tenemos las mismas necesidades y barreras. Tienen que incluirnos mientras desarrollan los compromisos para que realmente podamos encontrar soluciones a los problemas que enfrentamos. Porque así como nosotros podemos plantear nuestros propios, digamos, conflictos, también podemos encontrar las soluciones a estos conflictos. Eso sería todo. Muchas gracias.
Super. Thank you so much, Anna. Dula, please. What is an example of a GRF pledge that you would like people to join or make, or what elements to include?
Thank you for the question. So, first of all, I would like to see a perspective as a deaf person. So, as a deaf person, I think what's really important is the cultural diversity, and which sign language being an important part of our cultural difference. So, what I've observed in people who are deaf is that many of them who are disconnected with their family that they are born with, they lose their identity, and as well as when they are, especially when they're refugees, they lose this connection with the community as well as the heritage that they actually should have inherited from their parents and from the community because of the language diversity. I've experienced personally the Kazakh group that have moved to Mongolia. This group of children, because they are deaf, they are not able, and because they are not able to sign being moved to a different country, they're totally disconnected with the community as well as the heritage. So the parents are unable to pass on to the important information of the culture solely because the language was completely lost when they moved to a different country, and the deaf persons do not have the ability to integrate well because of the lack of of communication. So I hope that during this pledges that communities, when you think about languages, it's an important aspect of a cultural identity of a deaf person, especially as more so when they are a refugee. So I hope this pledge will be considered duly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Great examples, I think, speaking from that lived experience as well. That's really helpful. Osman, from your perspective, please, what would be an example of a pledge that you'd like people to make or join, or what do you want to see in pledges?
A mí me gustaría ver 3 compromisos que van prácticamente ligados, ya que el primero sería la consolidación de marcos legales. Como les mencioné, en Centroamérica generalmente no hay marcos legales para personas LGBTI, y esto sería muy importante, ya que no tenemos estadísticas más que de asesinatos de personas LGBTI, no tenemos cuántas personas han sido desplazadas por violencia, cuántas han migrado, y eso sería muy importante para ir consolidando ya prácticamente el segundo, que es el establecimiento de data, que esta vaya segregada por poblaciones, porque es muy importante para poder tener acciones que vayan directas, diferenciadas y que sean de manera sostenible para poder alcanzar las metas y compromisos de personas LGBTI en base a sus propias necesidades. Y el tercero sería ya trabajar prácticamente con lo de las municipalidades, que sería la coordinación de acciones con municipalidades, porque las municipalidades pueden tener acciones directas para su población con grupos más reducidos, y si hay leyes y datos estadísticas diferenciada para que se pueda ejecutar planes de acción, sería más de mayor importancia que este realmente pueda ir ligado a las personas LGBTI en base a sus necesidades, a su desplazamiento y a su propia población, que va a ir de manera más segregada con acciones directas y específicas para contrarrestar cualquier tipo de violencia que pueda existir durante esto. Y lo último que sí me gustaría ver, que tal vez no está dentro de los pledges, sería incluso la segregación de género y diversidad sexual, porque todavía en Latinoamérica se considera género únicamente para hombre y mujer. Entonces, al tener esa disparidad ahí en ese término, entonces como diversidad sexual nos limita a tener muchísimo acceso a otras casas. En el caso de Honduras, las casas refugio no admiten a mujeres transexuales ni a mujeres lesbianas, ya que solo es un espacio para mujeres cisgénero que han sido víctimas o sobrevivientes de violencia y esto nos limita a acceder. Por eso sería importante que separáramos el género de diversidad sexual para tener un mayor, amplio y mayor control de qué está pasando con la diversidad sexual. Solamente.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Osman. And I think huge thanks to all three of you for providing the ideas of and the reflection of why age, gender, and diversity are so important, but then also giving us some very concrete examples of what could be included in pledges in terms of actual pledges or other elements that you could include in pledges that you are working on, such as making basic services accessible, having children being really identified so they're able to access those services, making sure that you're thinking about language and the accessibility, whether it's sign language or other languages, but also the importance of disaggregated data so that you can see where the different needs are and making sure that people's needs are better understood. So huge thanks to that first round of our panelists. I see that someone has raised their hand. Unfortunately, we have a very tight schedule, so we don't have time to take questions from the floor in person at this point in time. But if you do have a question, please do put it into the Q&A. And even if it's not English, obviously, English, French, Spanish, or Arabic, we will try and answer them. If we can't answer them immediately, then we will try and do that after the after the event and get back to you on that. Before we turn to our next session, just taking a look at our poll results. I hope you can all see them. Yeah, I think you can now. So for those who are, the question around, are your pledges targeting refugees of different ages, genders, and diverse groups? 72% of you said yes, which is excellent. 19% said somewhat, and 16% said you don't know. But it's great to see that nobody said no. So I think that's already very positive, and we're moving in the right direction. And hopefully some of those ideas from Anna, Duya, and Osman, yes, will help you as you're further refining your pledges or further developing your pledges. So thank you again, Anna, Duya, and Osman, for taking us through this first session. And we are now going to move into the second part of our event, well, the second substantive topic on gender equality and protection from GBV. And so for this session, sorry, I have lots of windows open, so I have to keep moving them around. I apologize for that. Here, looking at what the tip sheet that we talked about from before recommends looking at in terms of your pledges. You could think about whether or not your pledge advances gender equality and addresses the structural barriers that prevent the equal participation of all, particularly of women and girls and LGBTQI plus people of all ages and diverse backgrounds. And I know that in the chat, I saw that we have Jenny Fillmore, who's part of the Sarita project, who had said that she'd like to see some pledges focusing on protecting forced migrants and refugees and asylum seekers from GBV, with a greater emphasis on reducing perpetration across refugee journeys and in refuge. And also Linda from the Forced Migration Research Institute, they've also been looking at some of those elements as well. And what we've seen is that refugees, and particularly women and girls, are often at increased risk of GBV and are at increased vulnerability because of their gender, as are LGBTQI people. So I think it's really looking at these two elements and making sure that we're focusing on gender equality and protection from GBV in our pledges as well. And for this part of our session, we have three different speakers. So if we could get that highlighted, we've got Armel Nungning, who is the Regional President of Coordinating Unit of Associations of Persons with Disabilities in the Northwest region of Cameroon. And Armel is the founder of Community Creative Center for Women and Girls with disabilities. I hope we have her because I don't see her yet pinned, but I'm hoping we will have her come up shortly. We then also have Sabine, who is pinned there. Hi, Sabine. Sabine, there's Armel. Thank you, Armel. Nice to see you. We have Sabine Eisman, who is desk officer with the German Federal Foreign Office, the Division for International Humanitarian Organizations and Multilateral Policy on Humanitarian Assistance. And Germany is currently the lead of the call to action on GBV on protection. Let me try that again. The call to action on protection from GBV in emergencies, which brings together states, international organizations, and NGOs to really work on prevention, response, and mitigation of gender-based violence. And WRC is a proud member, as are many others in the room today. So thank you, Sabine, for joining us. And last but not least on this panel, we have Claire Lofthouse, who is actually stepping in for a colleague who's unfortunately was trying to join us from Sudan, but her internet connection didn't allow it. So thank you for being the backup at the last minute, Claire. Claire is the technical advisor on child marriage in the Child Protection and Emergency section at Plan International. So again, before I turn to our panelists, I will ask those of you in the audience to please pose any questions you may have to any of the panelists from these current ones, the previous ones, or ones coming up. Don't hesitate to do that. We also have another Zoom poll to sort of hear how you feel you're doing on your pledges. And this is a three-part Zoom poll. So for this one, we have three questions. The first one being, I hope that is coming up as poll 3 will show up. There it is. Do your GRF pledges incorporate gender equality? Again, it's a multiple choice question. Sorry, I didn't get a lot of sleep the last few days. So I apologize for my slight spaciness. So that's the first question. And then if you scroll down, you'll see the second and third ones. The second is, do your GRF pledges incorporate protection from GBV? And the third one is, do your GRF pledges include innovative partnerships with women refugee-led organizations? And the reason we've got that one in there, and Sabine will speak to this, is one of the multi-stakeholder pledges is on GBV and gender equality. And one of the aims within that is speaking particularly to women refugee-led organizations. So I'm going to turn to the panelists now. So Armel, I'm going to ask you first. The multi-stakeholder pledge that calls for innovative partnerships with women refugee-led organizations. From your perspective, what's a good example of an innovative partnership that has advanced gender equality and protection from GBV?
Thank you. According to World Health Organization, 1 in every 5 women with disabilities are women with disabilities. And you notice this number is enhanced during emergency and displacement. So displaced women and girls with disabilities are at the high risk of gender-based violence, including sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, and are much less likely to access support services and reporting channels. So in particular, deaf women, women with intellectual disabilities, and women with mental health conditions or psychosocial disabilities are in the highest risks. In order to ensure that displaced women and girls with disabilities have equal access to GBV prevention, protection, and support services, specific measures are required. Without explicit commitment and specific action, GBV services will not automatically reach out to women with disabilities. This means that refugee and internally displaced women with disabilities are being left behind unless specific plans are put in place to ensure they are included in activities. It is a great step to see that the development of the multi-stakeholders pledge on the gender equality and protection against GBV. However, when reviewing the key outcomes and what concrete commitments could focus on, you notice there is zero mention of necessity to plan and be inclusive of women with different age, diversity, and disability. So there is only one reference to age gender, and disability in the pledge description regarding data gathering and analysis. I believe that the GRF, and in particular the multi-stakeholder pledge on gender equality and GBV, is perfect opportunity to address the gap, to include and protect and ensure participation of refugee women with disabilities and their organizations. For example, when pledging to facilitate participation and leadership of women-led organizations, it is particularly important to ensure that organizations of women with disabilities and displaced women with disabilities have access to support the support and reasonable accommodation that are required for their participation. So pledges should specifically list that information about prevention, protection, and GBV services that are provided in accessible format, including easy to read and sign language. So GBV services must receive training and tools to ensure that they are sensitized to how women with disabilities experience violence and what measures are required in order to support them. That would be a great step if that is taken into consideration. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Armel. And I think that point you made about really being able to ensure that you're looking at what are you doing in terms of planning to be able to make sure that you're identifying women with disabilities and providing the elements and services needed is really critical. Thank you for that, Armel. Sabine, from your perspective and Germany in the particular role as the call to action lead, I think, having taken on leadership for that GBV, gender equality, multi-stakeholder pledge, along with others, what would a successful gender-based violence and gender equality multi-stakeholder pledge look like for Germany?
Thank you very much. And first, let me thank Armel for the intervention and the critical remarks. We're very happy. It's a point well taken, and we did include disability diversity into the pledge guidance, but obviously we've not been successful enough. So we will definitely look into that. I would like to make 3 points about what constitutes a successful, or what would constitute a successful pledge for us. The first point is the ubiquity really of the topic of our pledge. GBV is often underfunded, and we heard it already in the opening remarks that better GBV protection, response, and prevention brings better service provision. So we all know what to do, but we're not there yet. So if we can see the key outcomes of inclusion of forcibly displaced and stateless people in national protection systems, and innovative partnerships with women refugee-led organizations and women-led organizations, mirrored not only in these pledges, but in cross-cutting pledges all around the GRF, I think we would have come a big way forward, because that is precisely the nature of this GBV and gender equality pledge. And we seem to have obviously hit a nerve, and that is, I think, one of the marks of a successful multi-stakeholder pledge for us. We have big expressions of interest positively pouring in. It is satisfying an obvious need that is existing around the GRF. And as it often is with GBV, everybody knows it's important, but nobody really prioritizes it. And this is what this pledge is doing. It's prioritizing an incredible need that is there, and that means that partners are willing to get on board and are willing to take in the GBV perspective also within other pledges, making a really cross-cutting effort. And that brings me to my next point, is putting the multi-stakeholder pledge really makes it successful. This is for us one of the most important, but also most difficult parts, getting everybody to work together, getting into conversation, guiding them in collaborations that might not have been considered beforehand. So right now with the GRF, with the CTA plus multi-stakeholder pledge on GBV and gender equality, we see a multi-stakeholder, multi-partner, cross-regional, cross-border effort to really make sure that GBV protection and gender equality is mainstream throughout all different kinds of parts and policy initiatives within the GRF. And that is incredibly important because GBV is not a separate topic. And this leads to my third point, which is the added value. I think a successful multi-stakeholder pledge brings an added value apart from its own pledge contents. And it's especially easy with this pledge because it is not only about GBV. GBV protection and prevention, especially in connection to other factors, which we try to support very much. We try to support very much partners, including GBV protection, including innovative partnerships with women refugee-led organizations, also within other pledges to other topics they are making, such as livelihood support, and of course the inclusion and improvement of national systems, and the building of women refugee-led organizations, capacity building and inclusion, brings an added value not only for forcibly displaced and stateless persons, but will also bring an added value for the national system, will bring an added value for the countries that pledge, and will in the end serve to improve the whole system, the whole humanitarian and crisis response system, and not only affect, the GRF in a very, very focused way. So I hope I've been able to kind of get my point across. Thank you very much.
Very much so, Sabine. And I think, both you and Armel have pointed out just the pervasiveness of gender-based violence and the lack of gender equality that we face in the world. And I think that's so critical that we get that in various GRF pledges across all of them. So not only within the multi-stakeholder pledge on GBV and gender equality, but making sure that all GRF pledges really consider how they're going to be looking at GBV prevention, response, and mitigation, as well as gender equality. So thank you for that. And Sabine, I imagine that if people want to get engaged with the Call to Action Plus multi-stakeholder pledge, that there's definitely ways to do that. And I believe the link to the pledge has been pasted in the chat. So for those who are interested in it, please do take a look at that multi-stakeholder pledge. Last but not least on this panel, Claire, I'm going to turn to you. And again, thank you for stepping in at the last minute. When we talk about gender-based violence, child marriage is actually often much less visible when it comes to refugee responses. And obviously, child marriage is an egregious form of gender-based violence. So could you elaborate a little bit more on the issue of the link between GBV and child marriage and how we can leverage GRF pledges to address child marriage?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much, Manisha. And I think everything I'm going to say, hopefully, is just going to build on what's already been shared. And I know I have a very short time, and Manisha is a very strict moderator, so I'm going to just jump right into it. So as Manisha said, I'd really like to talk to you about a specific form of GBV that affects children, child marriage, and why we really need to take age, gender, and diversity into account when we're all making our commitments, and therefore that will cascade into our work. At Plan, we've conducted over the years a number of in-depth research studies with a number of partners on this call, actually, to really understand what is happening and why. And then this deep evidence-based and a community-driven and girl-led, rather a girl-centered approach taught us how critical and also how harmful it can be when we don't consider the unique and diverse needs of community, including among children and adolescents. So just firstly, did you know, for example, that child marriage prevalence rates in countries experiencing fragility is almost 2 times the global average? You might know that statistic, it's sometimes thrown around, but do you know why? And it's really because the dynamics of a crisis creates increased hardship and hostilities that limit families' ability to care for their children. Because of the loss of safety, services, infrastructure, homes, alternative options, especially for girls, pushes more families and girls themselves into impossible decisions to survive and carve out a stable future. I could sit here and share with you lots of examples from academia and research reports from NGOs, but I don't have that much time. And even if I did, we know it's been happening even before the academia wrote it up in papers, because we've seen it anecdotally in crises. Before a crisis happens, preempting a crisis, for example, with food insecurity and climate crises, as well as direct reactions to displacement. We also know that forcibly displaced girls, refugee girls, stateless girls, they're at an even higher risk of being married early and being forcibly married due to the added restrictions on their rights and the loss of documentation and identification. We also know that girls drop out of school, they drop out of the programs we provide when they get married. And we know that married girls are among the hardest to reach with our projects. Yet they face lifelong health and mental health issues as a result of marrying early, even if they initiated that marriage themselves. And this traps girls and the future generations in poverty and hardship that's very difficult to break. So what are we doing about it? Tackling child marriage and supporting ever married girls remains largely invisible across humanitarian response. Yet we all know it's there. And at times, sometimes our efforts in delivering that aid worsen the realities for girls and their families. And this really, really has to change. So I've listed a few pledges, things that I want you to think about when you're making your commitments. As I mentioned, we found in our work that across the humanitarian sector, there is a reluctance to see that the issue of child marriage is something that we should be weighing in on as humanitarians. Our position at Plan is really clear. Humanitarian settings, especially forced displacement, really elevate risks and worsen the drivers of child marriage. And while we know that ending child marriage will take long-term national action, we have a responsibility to support girls and their families during times of crisis. And our commitments, and therefore our work, must really factor in age, diversity, and intersectionality, and all of the other factors to ensure that we really represent girls in all their diversities and the realities that they face. And if we do this, we'll see much more impactful responses to difficult issues that are rooted in gender inequality like child marriage. I'd also like to stress that ever married girls, so girls who've ever experienced marriage, have unique needs. And they have experiences that likely do not reflect their age, and in many circumstances will have experienced child sexual abuse, intimate partner violence, and so married girls must be provided with adapted services that thoroughly leverage an adolescent response, and also this AGD, this age, gender and diversity, being really mindful of the stigma that they can face from their peers, as well as older women, when they try to access services for children or adults. Another point I'd like to share is how governments need to, or we would like governments to review their national action plans to end child marriage. And at the same time for donors to also think about their strategic frameworks and to check if forcibly displaced groups are included in those plans, or are we creating gaps? We'd also like to ask, am I done? Is that my 4 minutes?
More than.
Thank you so much for giving us this time to share these points on child marriage and GBV. If there's any other questions, I can answer them in the chat. Thanks, Manisha. Thanks,
Super.
everyone.
Thanks, Claire. And then if you did have a couple of other things that you didn't get to, please feel free to drop them in the chat so that we can capture them. Sorry for being so strict, but we've got to move on. Huge thanks to Armel, Sabine, and Claire. I think you really highlighted the need to be looking at GBV and gender equality in all your pledges because of the way that it affects women and girls and LGBTQI persons, particularly women and girls with disabilities as well. So really identifying who they are, making sure that their needs are being addressed, being able to include elements of GBV protection and gender equality, and looking at how girls are included so you can prevent child marriage as well across all the different pledges. And I think that element of really working with those who are affected, so particularly women and girls, and LGBTQI people, is particularly critical as well. So thank you to that panel. I'm going to quickly look at our poll 3 results very quickly. It's great to see that GRF pledges incorporating gender equality. 59% of you said you are incorporating it. 33% somewhat, 7% don't know. So those are relatively great. So hopefully after hearing our panelists, you will be inspired to go back and really look at how your pledge can incorporate gender equality. On GBV, also relatively positive, 52% saying yes, 11% saying no, 30% somewhat, and again, 7% don't know. So hopefully, again, you've got some ideas of how you might be able to incorporate GBV, or consider also joining the multi-stakeholder pledge on GBV and gender equality. And then last but not least, the slightly less positive here, we've only got 41% saying that your pledges include innovative partnerships with women refugee-led organizations, 22% no, 26% somewhat, and 15% don't know. But I think, as Armel and others pointed out, it's really critical to be involving women refugee-led organizations, because they are affected and they will have ideas of what the different needs are, how to engage people, and really identify and respond to the needs for different women and girls. So hopefully that's provided some inspiration for you. And I think on that point, really working with refugees themselves takes us very smoothly into the last of our 3 sections, and that is on meaningful participation. And here our tip sheet, asks the question, does the pledge promote the full, equal, and meaningful participation of refugees and host communities in decision-making, which is inclusive of all women and girls, young people and children, and individuals belonging to diverse groups, to ensure accountability to all affected people. And I think it's really, how do we make sure that we're finding ways to have that meaningful inclusion and participation of diverse refugees. And here it's my pleasure to have 2 speakers join us for this section. We have Emerilis Tavares, who is the eligibility coordinator for the National Refugee Committee with the government of Brazil, and Rez Gardi, who is the co-managing director of RSEAT, which is Refugees Seeking Equal Access at the Table. And again, the bios are pasted in the chat. And for those who haven't introduced yourselves yet, I know we had some technical challenges with the chat earlier on, but please do introduce yourselves if you hadn't, and please do use the Q&A for any questions that you may have. And before I turn to you, Emerilis and Rez, our last poll to get your feedback on from the audience is, do you plan to include diverse refugees in terms of age, gender, and all forms of diversity on your GRF delegation? And here you can either say yes, no, don't know yet, or you haven't received an invitation to the GRF. So if you haven't gotten one, maybe we can help get you one this way, I don't know. But really, I think it's, how do we make sure that we're able to include refugees and all their diversity on the GRF delegation, so that they can participate there. And again, we'll come back to the results towards the end. So firstly, Rez, I'm going to ask you, what has worked well in terms of meaningful refugee participation, especially in terms of those refugees from diverse age, gender, and diversity backgrounds?
Thank you very much, Manisha. So I'm the co-managing director of RSEAT, and for those who are not familiar, RSEAT is Refugees Seeking Equal Access at the Table. We're a global refugee-led organization working to enhance the effectiveness of global refugee responses by co-designing mechanisms to amplify refugee leadership ecosystems and to increase the participation of refugees at the state level that can then affect the participation and policies affecting refugees at the international level too. And we aim to do that in a meaningful, sustainable, and transformative way. Naturally, over the last few years, because of the focus on meaningful refugee participation, we've seen various forms of initiatives develop as an attempt to put into practice the commitment to have meaningful refugee participation, and it's taken various forms within national, regional, and global contexts. So for RSEAT specifically, we believe meaningful refugee participation occurs when refugees from diverse backgrounds have sustained influence in all fora where decisions, policies, and responses that impact the lives of refugees are being designed, implemented, and measured, and it should be in a manner that is accessible, broad, informed, safe, free and supported. And so what's worked well with the work that we've done at our seat is creating these refugee advisory mechanisms at the national level so that refugees can have sustained influence in their national systems, and then as a result also affect change at the international level. And we aim to do that in a way that is non-tokenistic and sustainable. There are many different refugee advisory bodies that we've helped to create globally. For example, there are now mechanisms in Canada, in the US, in New Zealand, and hopefully very soon in other countries like Australia, Germany, and various other contexts that we're working in. These are institutionalized, embedded mechanisms, so we aim for them not to be ad hoc. And the reason this is important is because then we're able to bring people who are chosen based on their expertise and the diversity and experience that they bring. And this is where AGD is considered as part of the selection by an transparent, independent selection committee. So during this process, we collaborate with refugee leaders, refugee-led organizations, academia, civil society, government partners, and other relevant stakeholders within the national context to co-create the mechanisms. And they involve a very diverse group taking into account AGD and the policy expertise within these communities. And in this process of co-designing, people who are working at the national levels are able to feed in based on their own expertise and then suggest others that can be brought in to help co-design the process. During the selection process, I think, again, this is very important, where the selection committee is really tasked with ensuring that there is a really inclusive approach to selecting the people that are on the refugee advisory mechanisms, and they're selected based on the expertise that they bring, the areas of work, their thematic expertise, but also their age, diversity, the identity, the place of origin, where they are resettled, or the path that they've come to be in that country, the process, whether it's through complementary pathways, whether they're asylum seekers, stateless, internally displaced, so that all these different experiences are taken into account, and then bringing expertise as well as their lived experience. So underrepresented groups, taking into account marginalized groups like LGBTQI+, to ensure that they're also included in these mechanisms and inform the process. So they come from a variety of backgrounds and experiences, and this is recognizing and valuing the diversity, not just as a matter of inclusivity, but also this recognition of the wide array of perspectives, needs, and solutions that need to be brought at the table if we really want the solutions to address the needs of these forcibly displaced populations. And diverse refugee representation can then lead to more informed decision-making processes, with participants able to draw on their unique experiences and their expertise to then contribute to the policy and program development at the national and international level. So in this context, the age, gender diversity is really crucial for crafting comprehensive solutions that are sensitive to the various challenges faced by different groups within the refugee population. And I just want to end with a couple of points that our partners, the Forcibly Displaced Peoples Network, with a focus specifically on LGBTIQ+ populations, have put forward. For example, the mental health sensitivities. How do we prepare refugees to participate in spaces that can sometimes be discriminatory, whether that's because of racism, ageism, anti-LGBTQI+ sentiments, also considering travel. If refugees are invited to speak or participate in particular forums, do they have to transit in particular countries that may put them at further risk because of their identity? The visibility aspect, is it dangerous for these advocates to be visible in this way in advocacy they're doing? And then lastly, the funding. It's really important to ensure that there are resources in place to ensure that this is sustained long-term impact rather than ad hoc approaches. So these are the considerations that have really been crucial to ensuring that these processes work. Back to you, Manisha.
Thanks so much, Rez. And I know that you've been working for so many years to get all this kind of these suggestions and making the progress that you've made has been really incredible to see. Even with the first Global Refugee Forum, there was great participation, but I know that for this one, there'll probably be even better refugee participation, but it's not only at an event like the GRF, but as you said, that sustained engagement throughout decision-making processes so that the views and lived experience is really being able to be transmitted so that you can ultimately find solutions. So thank you very much for that experience sharing, and also those great ideas for how we could be bringing in more meaningful participation. Amaryllis, please. How is Brazil improving meaningful refugee participation? What's working well, and what recommendations would you like to share with other states and pledging entities?
Thank you, Manisha. Brazil would like to highlight recent efforts under national and subnational public policies to ensure meaningful participation of refugees in policymaking. These include, for example, seats at the local councils and committees for refugees, stateless and migrants, including 16 at state level and 23 at city level, the creation of a national council for refugees, stateless and migrants, the conduction of participatory conferences to deliberate on the new national policy for refugees and migrants being established, consultations with affected population in the elaboration of specific responses for indigenous refugees arriving in Brazil in terms of shelter, documentation, education, health system, and other public policies. The government has also been emphasizing AGD sensitive systems and policies for refugees under the asylum system, such as the adoption of differentiated case processing modalities to analyze LGBTQI+ and female genital mutilation related asylum claims. A national program to accelerate responses to Afro-descendant refugees in Brazil was also launched earlier this year to enhance protection and local integration. This is particularly relevant given the historical challenges and grave consequences related to the colonial racist heritage, disproportionality which impacts the everyday lives of Afro-descendants and African persons in Brazil looking for equal opportunities to be locally integrated. As an initial outcome of this program, an action plan in support of the Haitian population in Brazil was launched to further identify and address gaps in their access to rights and opportunities in Brazil. To finalize, Brazil would like to mention that we are currently finalizing the pledges that will be presented in the GRF, addressing the following topics: resettlement and complementary pathways program, promotion of local inclusion of refugees and other people in need of international protection through initiatives in the fields of education, inclusion in the job market and the arts, improvement and the development of protection policies for groups in situation of greater vulnerability among those in need of international protection, such as the Afro-descendants and the LGBTQA people, strengthening local non-governmental organizations led by refugees and migrants, ensuring the participation of those at least one refugee representative as an invited member of the National Committee for Refugees, maintenance of Brazil's commitment to eradicating statelessness, inclusion of the nationality variable in databases and statistical and registration system in the areas of health, education, and other public policies that do not yet cover such breakdown, development of specific protection policies for cross-border indigenous people in displacement, expanding access to education and intermulticultural reception programs, continuously strengthening the national asylum system using improved information technology. Brazil has also recently engaged in discussions with RCET in order to establish an advisory refugee group in the country to be established next year. And finally, in the following weeks and months, Brazil will move forward in conversations with refugees, stateless, and other populations in need of international protection to ensure their continuous engagement in the GRF and throughout the implementation of the commitments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amaryllis. And I think it's an impressive list of ways in which you're involving not only refugees, but also stateless persons and migrants. And I think the way that you're having those consultations and the inclusion of them, not only at the state, but the city level, is a great example for other states that hopefully can follow on from that. And again, thank you both of you for sharing those experiences of what are some very practical ways to really ensure meaningful refugee participation throughout the year, not only for elements for, hang on a second, I suddenly have someone speaking. Sorry, I thank you for whoever muted that person. So maybe what we'll do, because I do see we have a question in the chat, so I'm going to just pose that to all of the panelists and while I look at the Zoom results for this session, and maybe while I'm doing that for any of the panelists who are keen to answer. Oh, it's already been answered. Hang on a second. I've lost the question. The question for any of the panelists, so if anybody feel free to come in on this, is from Osita Kingsley Odo from the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice. I've seen many pledges and implementations that lack sustainability. How can we ensure sustainability? We say we do it, but it's still problematic how many pledges and actions neglect the need for sustainability. And I guess that also speaks to your point, Rez, about you need that sustained engagement. So once interventions end, the challenges follow up and persist. So what are some of the thoughts that panelists may have on making sure that we have sustainability even beyond the GRF pledges? For any of the panelists from previous sessions, please feel free to put on your camera, and then Lisa, maybe you can highlight them, and I'll come to those of you who are willing to try to take that question on. In the meantime, I'm just going to take a look at our poll results for this session about whether or not you plan to include diverse refugees in terms of age, gender, and all forms of diversity on your delegation. And I'm really pleased to see that we've got 75% of you planning on doing so, 13% no, and then 6% don't know and haven't received, and also haven't received an invitation to the GRF yet. So hopefully for those who aren't planning on doing it, there will be some attempts to try to bring in meaningful refugee participation on your delegations. So now if I could maybe just turn back to the panel, and I don't see anybody else from the previous sessions daring to answer this question, but maybe Rez or Amaryllis, do you have any thoughts about how do we include sustainability, or how do we make sure that, you know, pledges are sustainable even after they potentially end?
I would be happy to give it a first attempt and then hand over to my fellow panelist. Indeed, it's in our work, it's focusing on this long-term impact. So working really in partnership with refugees and forcibly displaced groups themselves, so that the pledges that are being designed reflect the needs of forcibly displaced people and the realities that they're facing, and then having this ongoing commitment to work together post GRF, post the pledging period, so that it is really focused on long-term impact. And this is what we mean when we say that it's not an ad hoc one-off approach. And if you're really focusing on institutionalizing and embedding these mechanisms within the work, then naturally that happens, that ongoing relationship and the sustainability, because you're in constant partnership, working together to reflect the needs, to reflect the work that's already happened, and monitoring and evaluating what steps have already been taken, and then reflecting on the need to make changes or to reassess or to co-design different follow-up actions based on that. So really ensuring that you have a true, meaningful partnership with forcibly displaced communities with diverse backgrounds, then I think lends itself to the ability to create a sustainable process. And so this is really at the heart of the work that RCEP is trying to promote, that these should be embedded practices, not just because the GRF is coming up, not just because there's a particular event and you want to have a refugee as part of your delegation or as a speaker on a panel, but rather because you've already established this trust and meaningful partnership to continue to do the work together. So I think this is the best way to approach this, the issue of sustainability, is really embedding the practice.
Super. Thanks so much, Rez. And I think the group of friends on age, gender, and diversity has tried to sort of embody that sustainability element by having refugees as part of the group and making sure that we're continuing the conversation on a regular basis, trying to influence those different policy and decision-making spaces as well. And Marissa, did you want to complement anything that Rez said in terms of the sustainability element? And I think some of the practices you've already described would speak to that sustainability in terms of the different ways that you're involving refugees and stateless and migrants as well.
I think Rez already mentioned so many ways of making the pledges sustainable, but I would give a focus on the participation of the refugees and population of concern in the formulation of the pledges, but also strengthening their local integration so they could be able to sustain their rights and to be able to guarantee that their views are contemplated in the process. So I think the way of doing it to make it very sustainable is to provide them with the right tools so they can be autonomous and be able to enjoy their rights.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to both of you. And with that, we wrap up this session. But I think how we can make sure you've got that sustained participation is really critical. So huge thanks again, Rez and Amaryllis, for your contributions there. Before I turn to the Assistant High Commissioner on Protection for our closing, I just wanted to kind of quickly go back through. We've heard from a range of really excellent panelists today with different views and perspectives about why an age, gender, and diversity inclusive approach is really key, and why making sure that age, gender, and diversity are included in Global Refugee Forum pledges is really essential. We started off talking about, last time at the Refugee Forum, we only had 30% that were inclusive of age, gender, and diversity. And Linda has posted in the chat earlier on a link to that research so you can see where those kind of figures come from. But if we're able to really make sure that pledges are inclusive of age, gender, and diversity, we can make sure that we are meeting the needs of diverse refugees who will have various vulnerabilities that come about from their diversities, but also looking at what are their different needs and their capacities to respond is really key. And if we're making sure that we've got that AGD inclusiveness, we're going to be able to track progress much more. We then talked a little bit about what are some of the different diverse groups, whether it's children, and even children, I think it's really the point, whether it's children or people with disabilities or LGBTQI people, none of these groups are homogenous. We're all individual human beings. We have different needs, different characteristics, different capacities. And so it's really being able to involve them and make sure that they're meaningfully involved to be able to express what those needs are, what those vulnerabilities are, what capacities they can bring to help with a response, or to be able to provide solutions or to search for solutions. And I think there it will be really critical in order to make sure that we're really including everyone and really finding ways to do that. And I think it's also really important that we're looking at those different diverse groups, because they can be exposed to violence because of who they are or what group they belong to. I think that also makes it really essential that we're looking at that very carefully. In terms of GBV and gender equality, very pervasive issues that need to be addressed across all AGD pledges. And I think it's really critical that those who are doing pledges, in addition to the GBV, gender equality, the global, gender-based violence, gender equality, multi-stakeholder pledge, to also look at the pledges that you're developing to make sure that GBV prevention is brought into that gender equality is brought into that, because it is such a pervasive problem. And for example, women with disabilities are particularly vulnerable. And so really involving them and women refugee-led organizations so that they can identify the needs and the responses is also very critical. And then I think we've also seen how there's different examples of what you could be including in your pledges, and that need for making sure that we've got that sustained and meaningful participation of refugees throughout. So huge thanks to all our panelists. I will do a final thank you after I go to Gillian Triggs, who is the Assistant High Commissioner for Protection. Gillian, it's lovely to see you again, and I'm going to turn to you for some closing remarks and next steps, please.
Well, thank you very much, Manisha, and it's wonderful to be with you all. I see a large number of participants and some faces I know, so thank you all so much for being part of this. I know that the group of Friends for the Age, Gender, Diversity strategy and policy have been so consistent in supporting it. I think you all will be aware that the policy has been under some threat. It's not agreed by many countries and not all stakeholders, but I think we have, particularly with the Secretary General's support, a better sense that we know we're going in the right direction and we will maintain it. Many of you will know, of course, that the Age, Gender, Diversity policy at UNHCR has been in existence for more than 20 years, working along these lines for nearly 30. So it's very, very much embedded in UNHCR's policies, but is not, in fact, as well embedded as we would like in other UN agencies or other groups. So I think that the group of Friends is enormously important. I know these are closing remarks, and I always feel a little awkward about giving closing remarks to a session that I haven't been able to be part of. That's a bit presumptuous of me, but nonetheless, I've had another meeting on some other important initiatives for displaced people, so I hope you don't mind. But I have got some basic comments to make, if I may, and I'll be very, very short because I know that it is meant to be just closing. But can I begin by, of course, thanking you, the group of Friends, for your consistency and support, and to thank the Australian Permanent Mission to the United Nations in Geneva for co-hosting the event. It's very important that you're such strong supporters of this policy. It really has mattered over these last few months. The aim, or one of the things that we're talking about, and I know you're talking about, is what is the relationship between the Age, Gender, Diversity policy and the Global Compact on Refugees. You're all aware that the compact is a different approach. It's not a legal document. It's about an equitable sharing of burdens and responsibilities globally, but to be done through
I've lost Gillian. Has anybody else? Sorry.
Yes, we are. Unfortunately, she's.
Oh dear. While we're waiting for Gillian hopefully to come back, and I hope we will get her connection sorted quite quickly, let me just thank everyone who has been on the panels. We had Anna, Duya, Osman, Armel, Sabine, Claire, Rez, Emerilis, and Gillian, who we will hopefully get back. But also, as Gillian was saying, huge thanks to Australia for co-hosting with UNHCR and the GRF Age, Gender, Diversity group of Friends. And I think it's been a really helpful session for really identifying where we have opportunities to make our pledges more inclusive. I was filling time, Gillian, until you came back.
You.
So.
You're doing a brilliant job. Thank you, Manisha. Look, I won't go on for too much. Sorry about that breakdown. But basically, I think I wanted to make the point that the Global Compact on Refugees is our strategic direction. That's where we're going. And it was very important in that, in the compact, that it should include the age, gender, and diversity considerations. So it's part of our strategy. It's a priority in our strategy from the High Commissioner on through the organization. And we're very serious about it. We know that from 2019, the Global Refugee Forum, the first one nearly 4 years ago, we saw a disappointing engagement with the age, gender, diversity, and I think that has to be acknowledged. We know that we need a collective effort if we're going to make this effective. And one thing that really I think is rather worrying, at that time in 2019, only 70 70% of the pledges made no reference whatsoever to AGD diversity groups as part of pledges. So we clearly had a long way to go 4 years ago, and I think we've made some progress since then. We saw in the indicator report in 21 a growing number of pledges on children, on youth, still fewer than 1 or less than 1% of pledges on older people, 25% on gender, 4% on disabilities, and less than 1% on LGBTIQ. So we've got a long way to go. But these 2 years, I think we're starting to see a much greater engagement on these questions, and particularly children. When 42% of the people we serve at UNHCR are children, then clearly we want to encourage those pledges to be more inclusive. So really my message in summing up is to thank you for your work, and to say we really do call on you all to use what advocacy capacity you have to collectively push towards inclusive AGD policies in the GRF pledges. But as I said, and you may have missed it, I think what's going to be really exciting about this forum is that there will be 300 refugees at the meeting. We've never had that before. So we have, if I can put it broadly, we've got kings, presidents, queens, prime ministers, foreign ministers, but right next to them will be refugees and refugee-led organizations. That's pretty much a first, I think, for a meeting of this kind. 3,000 people coming, lots of space to move around and talk. It's a great opportunity, but it's an opportunity to take us a bit further down the track of genuine participation of the refugee community and their very important voice. So thank you very much indeed for this, and back to you, Manisha.
Thank you so much, Jillian. And I did the thanks to everybody while we lost you. So just a quick thank you again to everybody who helped put this together, everyone in the audience for your engagement, all our panelists, and for all the behind the scenes work, including to all the interpreters. Huge thanks to everyone and to those in the group of friends who have been tirelessly working on putting this event together for several months now. And we'll make sure that the kind of highlights or the recording or something is put onto the website and that we're able to share some of the outcomes. So huge thanks to everyone again. And I wish you all great success in putting age, gender, and diversity into your GRF pledges. And we look forward to seeing those pledges at the Global Refugee Forum. Thank you again, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you all.